Hello, Kickstarter supporters. This is Joe Grabowski with the FBI team, and I am giving you a quick walkthrough in this presentation of how gameplay works for a typical round of Father Brown Investigations: The Death of Sir Percy Coldwell. I apologize for my delay in getting this video put together. The methods with which we have playtested the game are not necessarily camera ready. In short, we have our own cards that we've been able to print out on typical copy paper and play with those, and so the mechanisms have all been well tested, but as you see from the Kickstarter, the artwork and design of the game is still very much in progress. That's why we need your support to bring this thing to fruition. And so getting it ready in a presentation mode presented a bit of a challenge, and I went through a lot of different options before finally coming up with a simple slideshow to walk you through how the gameplay works. This won't even be a complete walkthrough. We're not going to show an example of gameplay, but this will give you an idea of what the game entails, what the primary mechanisms are, and how you can have repeated fun with this game. Because we've had a lot of questions from supporters about, for example, if you solve the mystery, don't you know the end of the game? Is this a play once sort of thing, like other solve a murder games out there on the market? No, this is a very, very repeatable play game. So you can play this again and again and get a lot of value out of the box. This is a walkthrough of the base game, where we'll cover the basic structure and components that are involved. And then next week, I'll try to provide you a look at how the deluxe game differs from this with the second rule set and the second way to play that is involved with the board that we're creating. So first of all, the game begins with what we call the crime scene, and that means laying out the suspect cards on the table. And then after the suspect cards are laid out, you see that we have 7 in this gameplay. We'll put the crime card front and center. And then below the suspects that are involved in the game, we will put 2 rows of evidence cards from the evidence deck. And this establishes at the crime scene clues that we call the suspect profile. So the individual suspects will be laid out face up, the crime will be here, and then evidence cards related to those. And we'll take a look at how each of these cards looks in more detail. First of all, there's the crime card, and this is the most important card with respect to how the game is won. It has the name of the game, the name of the crime having been committed, and the narrative about the crime. But then down here at the bottom are the most important parts. We have what are called the criminal capacities. These are the abilities that a suspect has to have in order to have committed the crime. And we see here there are 4. The abilities of poisons, cunning, lockpicking, and forgery. And then also stipulations about which suspects can have committed the crime. In this case, the suspect has to have either a strong or brilliant mind. Now, if we look at 2 examples of a suspect card, first of all, we'll notice that Prince Ego over here, which is a card you've seen in the Kickstarter, he suffices for that crime card that we just saw because his mind is brilliant. However, Eustace Coldwell, the cousin of Sir Percy, he has a mind that is weak. So the question might occur to people, why is Eustace even on the board or in play at this point? That's because there are special cards and other things that can come up during gameplay that would suddenly make Eustace eligible because they would change the nature of the crime. For example, it would say that the individual who committed this crime was disguising their intelligence, and so that would put Eustace back in play. So there will seem to be red herring suspects on the table at first, and taking account of them is all part of the strategy of gameplay. Here we're going to review very quickly the different kinds of evidence cards that are in the game. So we saw those 2 rows of evidence that were at the crime scene, establishing the initial profiles for the suspects. Basically, the various kinds of evidence cards are what are captured here. You'll see we have 2 of the same kind, injured soul. Here we have an occupation card, here we have a deadly secret card, and here we have a characteristic trait card. Briefly, to look through the components on these cards, you have the name of the card up at the top. Then underneath it, you have the category, the 4 kinds of evidence that are in the game. And what they refer to are these. Occupation cards are things that the suspect has done in the past, and all occupation cards will make reference to a location. So you see here, this person worked as a botanist in Brazil. That becomes important because that location becomes how we tie evidence to that suspect during gameplay. The injured soul cards refer to things that have happened in the individual's past that gave them the criminal nature that they have. This is, of course, redolent of the way that Father Brown solves crimes. He looks at the soul of the suspect. So this person had a troubling encounter with koalas while living in Australia, and this is part of what has given him his criminal nature. We have here a symbol which references one of the capital sins that individual has manifest in their lives, and also an abilities grant, poisons. If you remember the crime card, it stipulated that poisons had to be involved in a suspect's past in order for that suspect to do the crime. We'll come back to what these various head symbols mean, these devil's heads, in a couple of slides. The other kind of crime card is a deadly secret. Here, you'll notice that this is card 1 of 3. In order to solve the crime, you need to acquire a complete deadly secret. That means you need to acquire all 3 of the same deadly secret in order to solve a crime. There are a whole bunch of deadly secrets in the game, but they're all comprised of 3 cards, and you're on the hunt for all of them. You'll also notice that the deadly secret card also includes one of the devil's heads marking a capital sin, and then an ability grant, forgery in this case. Calling your attention to the text on the card, it says South America here. So if we were holding this card in our hand and it says South America, we could attach this to a suspect on the board that had the botanist card underneath him as part of his subject history, because Brazil is in South America. So that's one of the ways that the connections work between these evidence cards and the criminal profile of the suspect on the board. And then here, the characteristic trait is the 4th kind of evidence card, in this case a rose-shaped birthmark. This works just like the location with respect to the occupation cards. The characteristic trait cards will also relate to narratives on other kinds of evidence cards. So a deadly secret card might, for example, say that the individual had an unusual birthmark, and then that would allow us to connect this evidence to that suspect if the characteristic trait applies. And these next few slides are just closer looks at those cards. And this shows you, as I said, how a complete deadly secret looks. So a complete deadly secret would comprise 3 cards, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and 3 of 3. That's going to be marked on the card. And you'll notice how the narratives relate to those characteristic markings and those occupation traits that might be in a suspect's history at the crime scene. So in this case, it mentions Asia and South America. So we would be on the lookout for suspects to which that pertains. Here it mentions a strange birthmark and an atrophic pinky finger, so either of those physical traits present in a suspect's background could allow us to attach this evidence to that individual. And on this card, you'll notice that there's a stipulation that you have to have a particular kind of investigation resource in order to acquire it, so getting the complete deadly secret is a little even more challenging. Our next topic is going to be, though, these grants at the bottom, especially the capital sin grants that are represented by these symbols. And of course, all this will be in detail explained not only in the rulebook, but also in the quick reference sheets that players keep at their sides. So one of the other characteristics that you need to have, or one of the other qualities that you have to have in order to solve the crime, in addition to a complete deadly secret and all of the abilities like forging, lockpicking, etc., that are stipulated on the crime card, you also have to have 4 of a kind of the capital sins. So you'd have to have, in this case, it's represented by a color, the green head. On our actual cards in the art design, it's a unique symbol, and that symbol will always be in the same location on every kind of card that has it. So you can kind of line them up and just count down the row to see once you acquire 4. And once you acquire 4, you know that you're able to solve the crime, at least with respect to this this quality of evidence. So you need, just to reiterate, you need the criminal capacity to commit the crime, which has to do with these abilities that the criminal has: lockpicking, cunning, forgery, black magic, etc. You need the soul of the criminal, and the soul of the criminal is represented by these capital sins that exist in the criminal's life, and you need 4 of a kind. And then the third element that you need to solve the crime is a complete deadly secret in the background of that criminal, because that's what led to the crime. Sir Percy found out that criminal's deadly secret, and he suffered the consequences for it. And this just shows you how you can line up your cards when they're in your hand, your evidence cards, in order to see, just counting up the row, that you have 4 of a kind, and now you know that at least the soul of the criminal qualification for solving the crime has been achieved. So to go through a basic walkthrough of how we go about attaching evidence to a suspect on the board, this is an example. It's not laid out in exactly the way it would be. And when I say on the board, I mean on the table. The crime scene is common to all of the investigators, the players who are playing. So it would consist of that row of suspects with the evidence below them, and then the crime card above, which stipulates the criminal capacities and the quality of the suspect. So relative to this crime card, we have Prince Ego, whose mind is brilliant, so we know that he is capable of this crime. And then we have 2 pieces of evidence attached to Prince Ego at the crime scene. One is that he has a characteristic birthmark, and the other is that he worked as a botanist in Brazil, where he learned how to use poisons. So already we have that his mind is brilliant, that's good, and he has the ability of poisons. So 2 elements on the crime card are already fulfilled just by the evidence at the crime scene. Our objective in gathering evidence will be to find the abilities of cunning, lockpicking, and forgery, as well as to find a complete deadly secret that we can attach to Prince Ego either by means of his birthmark or by means of his having worked in Brazil. and to establish that he had the soul of a criminal by finding 4 cards alike, again, that we can attach to him based on the location or the characteristic trait, that he has the soul of the criminal with 4 deadly sins of a like nature. And this is an example of how we would line those up. So when we discover financial fraud number 1, we see that it relates to South America. And so we would want to attach that to Prince Ego because he worked in Brazil. And once we've done this for 1 card in the deadly secret, the entire deadly secret, all 3 cards, are going to match that suspect. So we've already achieved that necessary attachment. Now the goal is to hunt through the evidence deck for the other 2 components of this financial fraud deadly secret. So how does that work? Well, that would work in a round of bidding. So you're looking to acquire all the necessaries for solving the crime. And the round of bidding goes that each investigator, on his or her turn, when he takes the role of the lead investigator, will turn up a certain number of evidence cards from the deck on the table. So you draw from the deck, and that stat, how many you get to draw, depends on which investigator you're playing as. It's explained on your player card. And then you get to look through those evidence cards, say it's 3, and you decide the order in which that evidence is to be presented to all the investigators. So you look through the evidence cards, you strategize, and then you lay them face up for bidding on the table. And then the player to your left begins the bidding process, and their goal is to commit investigation resources, which is the other deck that we haven't talked about, but it's simply cards with a value. So you might have thorough examination as a type of investigation resource, and thorough examination is worth, say, 6 points. So if the evidence card that has been presented is something that that player to your left really desires, he might put forth 6 value points of investigation resources to acquire that card. And then the bid goes to the person on his left, and that person can either pass or outbid him. So that person might bid 7. Then the person on that individual's left will pass. They're not interested in this evidence card. And then it comes back to you, say, if we're in a 4-player game. And coming back to you, you want that evidence card, so you bid a value of 8 to acquire it. And now it goes back to the person to your left, and so forth, until finally you have 1 high bidder and everyone else around the table has passed it back to that individual. That is how they acquire the evidence card. And once they acquire the evidence card, they add it to the evidence that they have in their hand, and they start to build their case. Again, they're looking to acquire 4 evil heads of the same kind. They're looking to acquire things that relate, like here South America relates to something on the board, Brazil. So they have the complete deadly secret. They have the soul of the criminal. And if you look down at the bottom, the other useful thing about stacking your cards this way is you can quickly see the abilities grants entailed. And in this case, we can count them off the list. We have poisons already at the crime scene. We have cunning here. We have lockpicking here. And we have forgery. And so in this scenario, the investigator holding all these cards, given this evidence at the crime scene, they could say, I have it, I know who did it, and they can solve the crime. And so they present their cards. So that's just a basic overview of the way that the gameplay works. Of course, there's many more little idiosyncrasies, ways that you can disrupt another investigator's investigation. You can add evidence at the crime scene, for example, that is maybe irrelevant or that you know will disrupt that individual's ability to make their case against the suspect. You can, with certain special cards, remove evidence from the crime scene and say that that evidence was planted there. You can, with certain special cards or abilities on your investigator card, do a hostile takeover of someone else's evidence and draw at random one of the evidence cards out of their hand that they're holding. And of course, you might be playing as Flambeau, who is not really an investigator, but simply posing as one, and Flambeau's job in the game will be to disrupt everyone's investigation by pulling various dastardly tricks that Flambeau is able to do. Hopefully this all makes a little bit more sense now if you were wondering about what this game is actually going to look like in the playthrough. And if anyone has any questions, I urge you to comment on this update. Again, I apologize that it is 2 days late. I will say about the game, it's an incredibly exciting, very replayable game. It allows for a lot of personality and banter around the table. It can be played in about 45 minutes, up to maybe 90 minutes, depending on how much debate and back and forth and how much you want to get into character with playing, and also, of course, the number of people at the table. But we have found it to be a really rich mechanism. There's a lot of moving parts. It takes a little bit of deduction. You have to have some basic geography, for example, to know that Brazil is in South America. And then your goal at the end of the game, once you've won, once you've acquired all the necessary evidence to be able to make a case against a suspect, that suspect could have committed this crime, you sum it up in true drawing room fashion, like a character from a great detective story, such as one of Chesterton's Father Brown stories. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your continued support. And please help us get the word out by encouraging your friends and family to join you in supporting Father Brown Investigations, the death of Sir Percy Coldwell.